so like this is like rock and roll grad school with like your hosts Heidi Hedquist and Luke Poling, and like they've totally got the beat.
So, may we start?
Please.
Hello, kitties.
Hello.
That was the number one show in heaven.
Are you going to ruin this for me before Friday?
No, I very much am not going to tell you anything about the show because I don't want to ruin it.
But I do want you to tell me. I'm very torn.
Well, here's what I can tell you. I sat third or fourth row in the balcony.
Yes.
On the Ron side. I guess we should say Sparks live and in person.
Yes. I feel like, do our listeners know how much we're obsessed with Sparks, or have we not really told them?
I think we have, because I made a suburban homeboy reference and you made fun of me.
True.
So third or fourth row balcony, right-hand side, Ron side of the stage.
Yes.
For the entire show, all I will say is underneath my mask, I had just a delighted grin on my face the entire time.
It's fantastic.
It was lovely.
Everything you dreamed it would be.
When Russell sings it, oh how he sings it. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yes.
It was wonderful. And I've seen on all the various social medias people saying, my God, amazing show, great show. And I was trying to not fall into the trap of being like, oh my God, this is going to be,
Right.
It was wonderful. So much that the person sitting next to me, who I had never met before, and we sort of exchanged no, I'm 28, you're 26, here's your seat. They go up, on every other number.
Did you ask them to go to cool places with you? Like I asked you to?
I did not. But at the end of the show, we just kind of looked at each other and he was like, wow. I was like, yeah, that was a good one.
This row ain't big enough for the both of us?
I did not, which is weird because there was only the two of us in this row. So the entire theater.
Oh, that would have been hilarious.
I know. Entire theater, 1,500 seats, apparently sold out. There was a line at the box office. I got there early, probably too early, and stood outside. I was the third in.
That's amazing.
For reserved seats. So it wasn't like with standing next to this woman who one would not stop talking, had seen them Saturday in DC, lives in New York, was going up to Boston, and I think she might even be trying to go to both shows. I will give you the advance warning. The merch table was pretty picked over.
Okay.
However, when I purchased this, they also had a t-shirt similar.
Okay.
And they said, we're out of those. We only have them in like double XL, but we'll be getting more tomorrow. To which the person who was standing next to me at the merch table was like, and what good does that do me tonight?
Right.
And they're like, But I guess multiple people do multiple runs. Not that the set list changes much.
Okay.
I will just let you know when you're at the merch table.
Yes.
Read all the little tags on everything.
Oh, of course, I'm sure.
And that's all I'm going to say. We can go into more detail later because I know they're playing. I think Detroit's the last US show.
Really?
I believe it's one of the last. And then they're going over to, I think, Ireland and then the rest of the rest of Europe. Let me just triple check this here. But there's so much more.
Should I wear my Sparks shirt to the show?
You could. All right. So I misspoke. Tonight, night 2 at Town Hall in New York. Tomorrow, Boston. Friday,
Detroit.
Michigan. Saturday, Ontario, and then they take 8 days off. Dublin, Belfast, Glasgow, Manchester.
Well, no, it is this last US.
So yeah, Brussels, Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. So yes, this is the final run of North American shows. By the time this comes out, I guess there'll just be Detroit and Ontario. And if you are anywhere near that, I highly recommend it. I will just say at the end, they did promise they would be back soon. And as I was forcing the children to, something new I tried this morning, asking the children to get dressed and eat breakfast.
Oh,
Never done that one before.
how'd that work out?
Not great. Took us about
Oh.
45 minutes. But
Okay.
I did. The elder was, oh, did they play this? Did they play this?
Yes.
And I went down the set list. And I did say, well, they said they'd be back soon. If they come to Philly, we can go see them, because there were several younger Sparks in the crowd.
Good.
So, and really everybody needs tips for teens. So
They really do.
yes. So we can discuss this more later, but
Okay. After
all
Friday.
I will say, yes.
I might be on my way to Ontario though after Friday.
That's
And then
true.
I
If-
might be on my way to Estonia and Sweden.
It's very, very possible.
I mean, on the bus, obviously.
Obviously. And then the author of Forbidden Beat, SW Lauden, he also has written a series of punk rock mysteries, which,
Yes, which is,
do you need anything else?
I mean, come on now.
Right. No, that town ain't big enough for both of us.
True.
Um,
Isn't there a lot of, no, never mind. No, nothing. Forget
Edith Piaf said it better.
it. Yes. I was thinking, wasn't there, I was going to bring it down. I don't want to bring it down, but wasn't there a lot of, isn't Taylor
What?
Hawkins in that book?
People talk a lot about him,
Yeah,
which that's very true. We should
that's what I was.
have a tip of the cap.
Yeah.
It's really too sad. It's
It's
I
a
saw-
very sad one.
And I saw an interesting post somewhere over the weekend where they said that Foo Fighters were not the greatest band. They were the greatest band as far as current bands out there.
Mhm.
And sort of like for pure rock bands carrying the torch of just straight ahead, no frills, rock music. That's it. And also a couple folks were making the case that he is the last drummer of note where you knew his name.
Yeah.
And part of me is like, Max Weinberg, does that count?
Well,
It's different, but
it's different. And he
he
would
did
do
other stuff.
right.
And as Taylor Hawkins was just solely a great drummer.
Right.
And that's all he did, was drum very, very well.
Very well. And he was super fun and everybody loved him.
Yeah. And it does, one of my early thoughts did go to friend of the show, Taylor Hawkins,
Yes.
and wonder
this
what
is
they're going to
true.
do as an homage.
But they're going to have to do something.
Yeah. Ashes
For
at
sure.
Sea. I don't know what,
I
but
don't know. Perhaps.
all right. Well, now we're all down.
See, that's why I wasn't going
But-
to bring it up. That's why I stopped myself.
I know. Well,
But I do think it's important that we mention him because he's such a
It
part of the
is.
fabric of many of the books we've read on the show, many of the
Mhm.
things we've watched, many of the everything.
And I've been trying
Wasn't
to
he
share.
also a Sparks fan?
I would not shock me.
I feel like he was in that one too.
I did. He's not in the film
He's
because
not in the film.
I watched it again this weekend just to get
Okay.
ready.
Of course.
I have been sharing on our Tumblr page
Yes.
a few tributes and such. I don't know if you saw the Marquee of the Roxy in LA.
Yes.
Very nice, where they said, "There
Very
goes our
nice.
hero."
Mhm.
And I'm sure there'll be more of that. And I did see
Yes.
again somebody else saying that the tributes that Roger Taylor and Brian May paid were sort of, that's the thing
Yes.
that he would have been honored by, and the fact
Yeah.
that they were both like,
Rogers was amazing. I love
was like saying like he was in our band for all intents and
Right.
purposes. So
In the Exorcist, baby, you were really insane. You got busted, you got busted for cocaine.
you know, I didn't know if you could fill 200 pages with people talking about punk drumming, but you can, and then some, and easily.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, people's reactions to the concept for the book were all over the map, right? Because there would be that reaction of like, what are you going to say about drumming? And I think that for some reason with drums, people out of the gate automatically start thinking technically. They start thinking about math and playing. And I was actually more interested in the stories around people's journeys to how they became punk drummers and their experience being punk drummers and the kinds of punk drummers and musicians and music that influenced them on that journey. So it's more a book about the stories behind punk drummers than it is a manual on how to play punk drums.
But even, I mean, the one thing that I would like to consider myself well educated in the subject of music, but you mentioned the D beat, the D drum beat.
Yeah,
I'd never heard of this before. And then I like go to YouTube, look it up, and oh, of course, I know that sound. But I'd never heard that phrase before. And the fact that so many people throw it around, one, I felt woefully underinformed. But there seems like there's certain touchstones of drummers and bands that everyone seems to gravitate to and name check as, well, this guy was the one for me.
Yeah, I mean, any musician, I think, is going to have like the things that they're gravitated to in that really important phase when they're making the transition from strictly being a fan who loves the music to thinking that they can actually do it. And the people that are influencing you in that transition or just before that transition end up being really important. So for the guys for me were like Grant Hart from Husker Du, Bill Stevenson from The Descendants, DJ Bonebreak from X. These are the drummers that I was listening to as I was discovering punk rock. D.H. Peligro from Dead Kennedys, which was actually the first punk band I heard. And it just about ripped my head off the first time I heard it and kind of started this journey to my discovering and embracing punk rock over the next couple years. I was like 12 years old when I heard it.
So before we bring Heidi in, Chris Mars?
Yeah, Chris Mars is great.
Yeah, I was just guessing from the t-shirt that perhaps.
This is the cover of a Husker Du record, but somebody put the replacements.
It is.
I got it on Etsy.
That's awesome.
That's amazing.
Chris Mars is actually a fantastic example of like somebody that people don't often point to as a drumming inspiration, but he is so perfect for the replacements on those first few records. Like in particular, Sorry Ma, which is like my favorite Replacements record of all time. I love how scrappy they all are, right? As a new drummer, as a novice, of somebody who's like been raised on Neil Peart of Rush and knowing I'm never going to be that kind of drummer, to hear the Replacements and respond viscerally to what they're doing. And in particular, the kinds of drums that Chris Mars is playing within the context of those songs, it blew my mind. So yeah, he totally influenced me.
How much do you think drummers and sort of drummers in successful bands, is it that confluence, that Venn diagram of the right drummer for the right band? Or is it any drummer can find a place in a band and it's just finding out how you fit? Because you mentioned, to your Chris Mars example, someone who's super scrappy and just kind of fits in with the ethos of what the Stinsons and Paul Westerberg are trying to do with that band.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think that that's true, not just of punk drummers, but I also think you look at somebody like Keith Moon in the early phase of The Who. He was just the right drummer for that band. He had just the right energy, just the right manic energy for what The Who was doing at that time. John Bonham, can you imagine him playing with anybody but Led Zeppelin? And then I think within punk, what you get, or at least what I experienced with like early punk was, somebody like Tommy Ramone, who was never a drummer. They just couldn't find a drummer that could play the way that Tommy had envisioned it. And so he takes on the drums, and consequently his style is really iconoclastic. It's very straight ahead, very driving, very few fills and frills, but he sets the template for what punk rock drumming sounds like moving forward. You take somebody like Rat Scabies from The Damned, like that guy is just beating those drums within an inch of their life. And on that first Stand record, you're kind of hearing him learn to play. I mean, he'd been playing a bit before that, but you're hearing him learn and exploring in those songs. And there's like a visceral reaction and an energy that comes from that kind of approach to music and drumming. And so that's the stuff I was always really attracted to.
One of the things, this is a question and also a name drop, so it covers all of the bases. One of the things I thought was super interesting was the fact that the variety of influences that the people who are writing in this book name checked, and the education level of some of these drummers too, as musicians. Their musicianship varies. And we interviewed Richie Ramone, and he talked about the fact that, and credited his experience playing like in jazz like bands in high school and stuff, and was saying like the Ramones drum beat, if you do 4/4, 18th notes or 16th notes all the way, it doesn't work right. It's got to have just a little bit of a swing and a move to it, and that adds that percussion or that propulsiveness to it. How were you surprised by how educated some of these guys were? When you're going by the name Rat Scabies, you're not expecting a deep philosophical conversation, but
yes, you are.
Okay, well, we go to different parties, I think is what that is.
Anyone who could come be Rat Scabies would know it all.
Fair, yes.
I mean, it's worth noting, and this gets pointed out in Ira Elliott's opening essay in the book, that Rat Scabies actually invented gobbing, which is the practice of spitting on bands.
Yes.
And
which is, I rest my case.
Should be on his headstone.
He's still alive.
But I'm saying, as like eventually. First,
yes, and he's
first
still
line
alive.
of his obit, is.
I will take this to debate class any day of the week. I got 2 great points. That's all I need.
I mean, I'm a drummer myself, right? And so I've known drummers and I've known a lot of musicians, and you learn pretty quickly that everybody has a different story and a different path to how they got to the point where consumers or listeners are hearing them, like if we hear them on record. But you look at somebody like the foreword is written by Lucky Lehrer from the Circle Jerks. He's a trained jazz drummer. DJ Bonebreak from X, who I mentioned earlier, is a trained jazz drummer. There's also the self-taught guys like Rat Scabies. And Rat Scabies, in my interview with him, talks a lot about how being self-taught and being a garage rock style drummer forced him to be inventive in a way that really nobody else can do, because he's not about rudiments. He's playing like Rat Scabies, and no one except for Rat can really play like Rat. And so I think there's a lot of different ways that you can get to being a musician and get to the point where you're recording in a studio. And then it's just a matter of playing to the song and being the right musician and being the right fit for what the band is trying to achieve.
Going through the book, and obviously Rat comes up a lot, but it was hard for me to find a list of favorites that Lucky wasn't on.
Well, yeah. I mean,
was he by far the one who was truly like if you had to pick the best or the most that everyone loved the most, I feel like it's him.
He gets pointed out a lot. I mean, and for really good reason. I mean, you talk where the Circle Jerks come on the scene in that early hardcore scene. Lucky's playing wasn't just the forbidden beat, which is sort of like the oompa beat. He could do that. But if you listen to a song like Red Tape, I mean, he's playing the fastest tempo in the world, but also insane single stroke drum fills that are all over the map. And it's like, you can hear him attacking the song. You can hear him attacking the drum kit. And I think it's a hallmark of the kind of drummer he was in the Circle Jerks. So he gets name checked a lot. When I first started doing research for the book, Chuck Biscuits from DOA, he went on to play for a lot of other bands, but I specifically speak with Joey Shithead from DOA about Chuck and how Chuck was a kid that was just like hanging around playing bongos in the background, right? But he's somebody that people really love to point to. Spit Sticks from Fear is another one. Getting into the later 80s and early 90s, Derek Plord from Lagwagon, phenomenal drummer. He gets name checked a lot. Obviously, Trey Cool from Green Day gets name checked a lot. So generationally, you will see these trends start to emerge and certain names pop up a lot. Actually, and I won't mention him again, but Rat Scabies comes up the most. He's referenced the most. Yeah.
It's like he's here with us. You have to keep mentioning him. Telling you, it's true. That's true. His name definitely came up the most as a reader. Like it popped up the most. I just felt like Lucky was on the favorite list the most.
He's incredibly influential and really well respected.
Yeah. So of course my favorite, and I won't spoil it, but I won't say it correctly, but I think it was 5 things that are punk as fuck that you wouldn't expect. those were stellar.
Sherry Page.
Yes.
Yeah.
And all of her choices were fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going Karen Carpenter, then you really know drums.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And you said it. I didn't spoil it. You said it, but it was
Yeah.
fantastic and it makes sense. And it's so true.
Yeah. And she, I love that she's also talking in that same list about Sheila E.
Exactly.
She's talking about Karen Carpenter. She's
Yes.
talking about Blink 182, right?
Yes.
Like
she's right on. Like everything she's saying is right on, in my opinion.
And she's a current drummer. That band Thick is a young punk band that's recording, I believe, for Epitaph Records. They're really great. And I love that her influences are so diverse. And I felt that way also about like Uriah Hackney, who's the drummer for Rough Francis. And, there was a documentary that came out, I think 2012, about a band called Death, a proto-punk band from Detroit. Did you guys see that?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Uriah Hackney is the son of one of the members of that band. And so he was one of the kids that grew up suddenly finding out that his dad, who had been, and his uncle, who had been in a reggae band his whole life, had been in a proto-punk band. And Uriah and his brothers were in punk at that point. They were playing in punk bands at that point. So there was this whole thing that happened with that family. Awesome. But what's beautiful about it is, and I love this sort of like these synergies that happen throughout the book, is what Uriah lands on Dennis Thompson from the MC5 and the drummer from the Stooges. Like he's looking at these old Detroit drummers as his favorite drummers, only to find out his dad and his uncles were in this Detroit proto-punk band. So it's like there's like this beautiful happy accidents that are happening all over the place in the book, which is, I think, a function of having so many different perspectives.
Yeah.
When you talk about sort of the number of influences, when you just look at the folks who contributed to this, who appear in this, Heidi mentioned Lucky, the fact you got Mike Watt on record talking about, and Gina Schock gets a shout out, which I think
she gets a few too,
as well deserved. I feel like one, the Go-Go's are not the Go-Go's without the punk drumming in the background to keep it all together, and the folks like Trey Cool, and then personal hero Stephen McDonald. Is there anybody? Yeah, is there anybody that you were like, oh man, if I could just get this person? Because it seems like this book covers it all.
Oh, thank you. I tried really hard. I mean, I started off with the wish list, quite honestly, and the wish list unfortunately looked a lot like what my Peachy folder would have looked like in high school. It was just sort of like West Coast hardcore drummers from the 80s.
Did you just draw the band logos all over your list?
Over and over and over. I can still draw a really good DK.
There you go.
But, I realized pretty quickly looking at the list that it was going to be a pretty claustrophobic book, because it wouldn't be perspectives on punk drumming. It would be perspectives on mostly SST drummers from the middle 80s, which isn't as interesting a book. So
agree to disagree. But
but so what I did is I flipped to the idea of a timeline. And I was like, what are the beats? Oh, that's a bad pun. What are the beats I have to cover within this book to actually make it seem all encompassing? And once I did that, then it allowed me to broaden that list and go after specific people. Almost everybody that I approached was incredibly supportive of the idea, immediately got it, saw the need for it. Not everybody had the time or the inclination or wanted to write anything, or, so there are a couple people who remain on my wish list, but they will remain nameless. I knew I was in good shape when Mike Watt said yes. When I was able to get an excerpt from D.H. Peligro's book, because we're both on the same publishing company. When Jim Ruland, who's a fantastic punk writer, was able to write something about Bill Stevenson of the Descendants. And then I think, again, Betty Horowitz from the Gaslight Anthem, John Worster from Superchunk, Mindy Abovitz, who she's a drummer, but she also started the only all-female magazine called Tom Tom Magazine. Yes. So it's only female drummers. Awesome. And somebody like Bon Von Wheelie from Girl Trouble, which is a Pacific Northwest garage rock band, or Lynn Perko-Truhl from the Rex and the Dicks. As the names started coming in, I just was pinching myself all the time, because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm actually talking to so many of my heroes about so many of my heroes. So I'm glad that came across.
What was the thing that surprised you the most?
I think it was those happy accidents that I'm talking about, or something that Luke referenced earlier, which was that you start to see patterns forming about the kinds of references people are pointing at. Because I knew that that's what I wanted to happen, but I didn't know for sure that it was going to happen, that the breadth of diversity within those influences would be there. And then as it came together, I was feeling a real big sense of relief. And then I was just feeling this sort of sense of wonder at so many of these people that I consider influences and heroes had the same influences and heroes as I did, right? And there's like this beautiful connection that kind of goes back to, we all start off as fans before we're musicians.
You say, once you got a couple of these folks in place and they fell, where you're like, okay, we have a book now. And there's so much that I learned throughout reading this. I mentioned the use of the term D-beat and what that actually is. And I was like, oh, this is wonderful. Were you learning stuff throughout this process as essays were coming in, as you were talking to people? Were you, given your expertise on the subject matter, were you kind of going, wow, I never thought about it like that?
Every day, every essay or interview or top 5 list that came in, I would learn something new, or at least would get a different perspective on something that I thought I knew before. This is the 3rd book of this kind of format that I've done. I've done 2 previous books with the co-editor, Paul Myers, and those were about power pop. And it was the same kind of thing, where we would have a bunch of contributors giving us their perspective on the genre of power pop. When I decided to do this one on my own, I really liked that format, although I added listicles into it and I added interviews into it. And what that does is it kind of creates this sense of, like, imagine a cocktail party and you're going around from cluster to cluster of people.
Exactly.
And every cluster is having a different conversation, but they're all talking about the same subject, which is punk drumming in this case. And so that's what it really feels like to me when I read the book. And believe me, I had to read the book about 75 times in the editing process. I'm well familiar with it, but it's like every time I had that sensation that, oh, these are interesting people with interesting thoughts about a thing that we both care about.
Was there any essay or even just a quote that made you kind of rethink any of these musicians that you had perhaps underappreciated until somebody said, no, check them out?
I think that my friend Eric Beatner, prior to doing these music-focused nonfiction books, I was writing crime fiction. I've published a few books in the crime fiction genre. Eric Beatner is another really fantastic crime writer who's publishing a lot of books these days. But he grew up in just in awe of the DC punk scene. And I learned a lot about his perspective and what it was like to grow up as a teenager adjacent to that, and to be just like, basically it was like a religion to him. So I thought that was really interesting. I thought John Worster's list was really interesting. He's calling out Gina Shock, but he's also calling out like the Meat Puppets. He's talking specifically about what he does to get in shape before he goes back out on the road, and the songs that he plays along with. So that's got this like multi-dimensional aspect to it, because is a working drummer, highly respected working drummer. He's also hilarious. So of course his top 5 list is really hilarious, but I took a lot away from that one.
I love that though. I love those like peek under the tent of what it's like. How do you condition to go back out? And his was great. They're all great. And the format you did, it's so on top of, everyone's talking about this shared love. It's so digestible in the way you did it. It's a quick read, but it's a quick read that you retain it. You're not like, what was that? It all comes to you. And I think that's fantastic.
Oh, wow. That's really nice of you to say. Yeah. I think I initially went out with the idea that I was going to ask everybody to do an essay. And not everybody has the time or the inclination or thinks of themselves as a writer. And so I was like, maybe I'll just interview a couple people and we'll sprinkle those in. And then as I was putting those together, I kind of realized, a list would actually be really interesting here, because it's more like a quick bite, right? It's like you can read it in a quick sitting, but you can also read it as a chapter. But then within that, you're going to get 5 influences, and those 5 influences are going to make you go listen to those bands. Absolutely. And really, at the end of the day, that's what I want people to do. I want people to occasionally put the book down and pull that song up on whatever medium they want to listen to music on, and like experience it through the eyes of a drummer. right? Because we all listen to our favorite songs mostly through the vocals and the melody and the guitar lines. But once this book gets under your skin a little bit, you'll find yourself kind of listening with the drummer's ear, and you'll go, wow, I never realized that drummer did that right there. And I've been listening to this song for 40 years.
Forbidden Beat, Perspectives on Punk Drumming is available right now wherever you get your books. That includes places like your Barnes & Noble, your Amazon, and of course, a place like IndieBound. You can also order it directly from the publisher Rare Bird Books, where they are at rarebirdlit.com. You can also follow author and editor SW Lauden on both Twitter and Facebook, where he is at both places at SW Lauden.
You can check us out on all the various socials. Be sure to visit our website at rockandrollgradschool.com, and don't forget to leave us a review.
Today's show is produced by myself and Heidi Hedquist. Our reluctant producers are John Sauvé and Sandy Stone. Our willing producers are Rachel Allen and Randy Jeanette. Our intern is Zach Jackson. This one's for Philippe. Thank you, good night, and may all your favorite bands stay together.
I'm all